Hi, and welcome to Redhead Professor, my YouTube channel. And for this section, we're going to go over contribution margin. Previously, I did on identifying fixed and variable costs, and now we're going to look at contribution margin, which we've already broken out fixed and variable costs. And we're going to take it just a step further. So let's get this on the full screen. So we went over fixed and variable costs. All right, contribution margin. So at this point, we're trying to figure out how much of a margin there is that contributes to paying off the fixed costs. So we take the contribution margin, which is the excess of sales over variable costs. So once we've covered our variable costs, the costs like per unit, we have to cover the fixed costs, like the building, the payment for the building. So we need to know after the variable costs that are the costs associated with making that unit, how much we have that's left over that can go to pay for, like I said, the mortgage. So very simple, basic example here. Contribution margin is equal to sales minus variable costs. So let's think of a t-shirt company. So a t-shirt company sells a t-shirt for $15.99. That would be their sales. And then their variable costs would be the cost for the t-shirt, the cost for the sticker that maybe they slap on it, and whatever cool saying or whatever is on the front of it. That cost altogether is $5. So if we take out the variable costs of that $5, our contribution margin is $10.99. So that $10.99 could go to pay for the rent, for the building, for our t-shirt shop. But we make $10.99 in a contribution margin that can basically contribute to paying the fixed costs. Further, we can take the contribution margin and we can make a ratio out of it, and that is contribution margin divided by sales. So our contribution margin we figured out was $10.99. So now we just take $10.99, that contribution margin, and we divide it by the sales price of $15.99. So we come up with 68.7%. So this one is nice using a contribution margin ratio because you can take two totally different products. Say in this t-shirt shop that you have, you also sell, magnets for people's fridge. Cool magnets with cool little sayings or something. So you can take a product that is completely unlike a t-shirt, has different costs, different price, and you can boil it down to a ratio. So it's a little easier to compare than looking at something that's like, well, the magnet costs us 25 cents to make, and those are our variable costs, but we can sell it for $4.99. So the costs are so much different in number value that it makes it difficult to provide a useful analysis. So when you boil it down to a percentage, like a contribution margin ratio, it makes it easier to compare 24% to 68%. It's like, oh, wow, well, the 68% is clearly better. So it's a method for comparing when you're using percentages and ratios like this. It just makes it easier to compare two different amounts. Then the third one that we're looking at is the unit contribution margin, which is exactly what I did kind of on the first one. The first one I looked at one t-shirt. Unit contribution margin is just one unit. Instead of looking at, for contribution margin, you could look at the total sales minus the total variable costs. Unit contribution margin just really gets microscopic and looks at just one unit. So the sales price per unit minus the variable cost per unit, which is immediately where my brain goes anyway. I look at the smaller than the larger picture because I think it's easier to identify the variable costs when you're looking at a t-shirt versus just like looking at a big, huge sales number and trying to figure out what's variable, what's fixed. So in this example, at least, the unit contribution margin is the same as the contribution margin. I just did one unit when I looked at the contribution margin versus the unit contribution margin, where you literally, that's really what you do. You look at just one. This one, you could have looked at total product sales, not just one unit. So it's kind of the same thing. It just depends on how many units you're looking at. So let's put a couple of these into practice. So we're going to look at Bob's Manufacturing Company, and we're going to try and calculate contribution margin and contribution margin ratio and unit contribution margin. So the contribution margin is sales minus variable costs. Well, the pieces of information that it gives us are that Bob's Manufacturing Company sells 40,000 units at $24 per unit. The variable costs are $18 per unit, and the fixed costs are $50,000. So contribution margin looks at sales overall minus variable costs. So we're going to look at sells 40,000 units. So we sell 40,000 units at $24 a unit. So our sales, this would be sales, 40,000 times 24. So we have $960,000 in sales, overall total price. Now, contribution margin is sales minus variable costs. So our overall sales is $960,000. Our variable costs are $18 per unit. So we sold 18,000 units. Our variable costs are $18 of variable costs. So 40,000 times 18 gives us $720,000. So to come up with that contribution margin, we take sales minus variable costs. So sales minus variable costs. So we get $240,000 is our contribution margin. Okay. So we figured out our contribution margin. Our overall number is $240,000. Our contribution margin ratio is contribution margin divided by sales. Well, we have our contribution margin right here. So $240,000. And our sales was $960,000. So $960,000. And we're going to take the contribution margin of $240,000 and divide it by sales. So we end up at 0.25, and then we can move the decimal place twice and turn it into a percentage. So 25% is our contribution margin ratio. Oops. Margin ratio. Okay. And then the last one we want to look at are unit contribution margin, which is our sales price per unit minus our variable cost per unit. So we can kind of look at that up here. We had our sales per unit minus variable cost per unit. Overall, we did our total. Oops, didn't mean to do that. So this is our total overall, and this is per unit. So we just need to look at these cells, not these ones, because that was the total. So the per unit, we're looking at sales price per unit, $24, minus the variable cost per unit, is $18. So we can take sales price per unit minus variable cost per unit, and we end up with unit contribution margin of $6. Unit contribution margin. So we have contribution margin of $240,000, contribution margin ratio of 25%, and a per unit contribution margin of $6. Now, this contribution margin, it becomes very useful when we move to the next step, which is break-even analysis. And I will see you then.